welcome to our new Global Frontiers speaker series, and we are kicking it off with an incredible speaker today. I've been so excited about this presentation ever since Noel Ellison introduced herself to our center. We're making the very best use we possibly can of her generosity, as you can see, because she just got in touch with us a month or so ago, was it, Noel? And we're putting her to work immediately. And once you hear her speak, you'll see why we jumped on the opportunity to engage with her in every possible way. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing her because I think Noel is going to, I think you're going to learn a lot about her from the questions that that I'm going to ask her and that she's going to share answers to with us. So you should know that she is a tax partner at KPMG. Now, there are probably people here who are really scared by that title because a tax partner sounds like a very formidable person to us non-accounting people. But the reason that Noel actually got in touch with us in the first place is that she was interested in attracting students to KPMG who are not first and foremost accountants, because what she does is much broader than that. And she wanted people with international skills. So needless to say, we jumped on that, and you're going to hear a lot more about that this evening. So Noel, welcome. Do you want to begin with a quick overview of yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually an old friend and a former student of McCombs in the international business. So this is super exciting for me to be back talking to you guys and sharing with you what I do and kind of what my journey has been and how exciting it is to be in an international or global environment, and just share with you guys what potential you all have in the marketplace. And especially now, it's a really exciting time. So as I said, I went to McCombs and have a minor in international business, a major in French, and I fell into the accounting profession and navigated my way through an accounting firm. And my job is really global mobility services. So I help companies send their employees across the border. Okay. So I don't know how familiar you guys are with that idea. Maybe you've thought about studying abroad or even working abroad, but there is an entire industry that we have at KPMG, that we serve at KPMG. And I'm just going to, oh, Deirdre, did you want to maybe enable screen sharing? I did have a slide that kind of gives you a little bit more, some numbers about what we do and history of what that is. So let me just show you real quick. Good deal, thanks. Can y'all see that? Okay, good. So globally, we employ 5,000 professionals that help companies send people across the border. And you can see in this wheel in the center what some of those areas are, and this isn't even all of them. So kind of the basic things that I started doing is preparing tax returns for an employee who, for example, it was hired in the US, but now they're on an assignment in Germany and they live with their family. They moved their family overseas to live in Germany, and they have to file taxes in 2 different countries. So we serve the client. We're providing a service to the client by helping their employees file returns. But we do actually much more than that. The tax return is really just the tip of the iceberg. What we are really trying to do is help the company stay compliant as an employer to report wages in both jurisdictions and help the individual stay compliant. And then beyond that, we have services that help the company understand, well, if I do send an employee to Germany, what do they need? I mean, they already pay for a house in the US. Am I going to also make them pay for their house in Germany? So the company might need help developing a policy. How do I pay the employee? What allowances are typical for that country that they're being sent to, for the industry that they're in, and for the level of employee? So it may be that if they're sending a junior employee, somebody that they just want to learn the business, that they may authorize economy airfare, but if they're sending an executive, they may authorize business class airfare to ship their family abroad. So we kind of help them through some of those decisions and benchmark with the industry so that they can stay competitive, so that they can pay an employee to do the job and be happy doing the job, and not overpay, because it gets a little costly for them to send someone overseas, if you can imagine. A lot of times companies will want to send people to fill a position because they can't find an employee in that country with that skill set that they need. Sometimes they'll be using it as a development opportunity. So they say, hey, you know what? Billy over here has a lot of potential, but we really want him to understand what our business looks like outside of the US. So let's send him to Singapore for a couple of years so he can understand how the business works, either in this other country or where manufacturing might be. So it's really exciting stuff. And, you know, I talked about some of those very specific things that we do, which is filing tax returns and helping with policies, but kind of the overarching mindset that I have as a consultant is, how do I help the company make an assignment successful? And how do I connect with the business to help them create a successful employee experience?
Super. Well, that was a great introduction, and I really appreciate that. Why does a company like KPMG provide such broad services? If you're in the tax group, then what has motivated a company like KPMG to offer services like this that go so far beyond tax accounting?
You know, it's funny, when I started in this industry 25 years ago, there was a very niche market in this. And when you said the word expatriate, there was so much in this industry that was around oil and gas. So people that went on assignment were typically individuals who worked in a very specific industry, in the oil and gas industry, and they needed to be on location where they were drilling. And so the Exxon Mobils of the world and the Chevrons were the ones that kind of led the charge. And accounting firms, where maybe we audited those companies or we provided corporate tax compliance services, said, hey, you know what? We've got these guys and they're working in Venezuela, and what do we do? And so our practice was born, you know, 35, 40 years ago, and evolved. And so we might have started with preparing income tax returns for these individuals, but then we realized, you know, there's a lot more to it than that. There's, you know, developing the policies. And KPMG is known as, you know, we're one of the big four accounting firms, and we're typically known as a tax and an audit firm. But the consulting services that we've provided have evolved out of needs that companies have, the complexities that they have, and the business needs that they have to solve problems. And so that's how we've developed. And where in my career, what I've seen change is, there used to be this idea of a traditional assignment. So you take your family and you move from country A to country B for 2 years or 3 years. Over the past couple of decades, what I've seen happen, and especially leading right up to COVID, is we have these all types of assignments, project-based assignments, where you have engineers that are implementing software solutions on site in a particular country, and they fly in for anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months to 9 months, and they trigger tax liabilities in those countries. Well, that's a very different assignment type from a traditional assignment, because with the traditional assignment, you know the family's going, you know they're going to secure housing. But these project-based assignments, it could just be somebody getting on a plane and flying to another country. And we've seen more and more and more people on airplanes. And then the other area that we've seen grow are what we call business travelers, who they're not even on assignment. They're not on a project. They just travel so frequently to another location that their presence 2 weeks here, 2 weeks another location, 2 weeks back home will trigger a requirement to file a tax return for the individual and trigger a requirement for the employer to report wages and withhold taxes. So you have HR departments that are trying to keep up with that obligation. You have business executives that are performing a business and they're in country, maybe without even permission to be in that country, doing business on the fly, and the company is trying to keep pace with that. Now, maybe that happened a little bit 25 years ago, but what we've seen happen is as our technology advances, as students, as employees, as employers, so have the tax authorities caught up with that, right? With the IRS, and maybe you guys have experienced this, you can now e-file your tax return, which didn't used to happen. So tax authorities are starting to do audits, and they're starting to ask for the company's electronic travel records. They've even gone so far as to, in an audit, to ask for an employee's phone records to see where that employee is pinging in from. And it's really just a matter of time before a tax authority will say, we want to see the IP address from where your employees are logging in from. And it's kind of interesting because this is really the COVID phenomenon that we've experienced the last couple of years. You guys were probably logging in, going to class over the last couple of years maybe from Austin, maybe from home, maybe from vacation somewhere else, maybe from, and that's happened everywhere. And so all of these tax authorities are looking for ways to derive revenue and keep employers compliant. So sorry to get a little tax technical on you guys. I never used to like tax as much. In fact, I would cry with my accounting books. I mean, literally open the accounting book and start crying. So I thought it was really interesting that I ended up falling into the accounting profession or tax profession as a consultant.
And that you love.
And that I like it. And that I've forged a robust career out of it. And not because I think the mindset I used, Deirdre, was I knew from the very beginning, and maybe this is why you all have chosen to be, in the Center for Global Business, but I knew I wanted to do something global with my career. I knew I loved languages. I knew I loved traveling. I knew I loved meeting people that weren't from my town in Texas and that had a unique perspective on the world. And so I said, well, I speak languages and I like traveling, but I don't want to be a translator. And I don't think I want to do something with languages. I just want to use it. So I want to be a consultant, but I don't know what I'm going to consult about. And it kind of I fell into this job, which is global mobility, that sounded really cool because they had pictures of the Eiffel Tower and, the Big Ben in London. And there was this idea of doing something global and the promise of maybe getting to work abroad. So it all kind of came
okay. So your next assignment, Noel, is that we're going to put you in an ad for, study abroad in the Center for Global Business and international business in general. Okay, super. Well, that was a really multifaceted answer to that question, and it brings up so many other interesting questions. One of the things, that we're hearing, I read an article about this recently that said that companies are moving people around less now because of COVID and also technological advances. We've all discovered that it's easier to have a meeting with people who aren't sitting across from you than we realized, and plane travel is expensive and all of that. But, your work involves companies or supporting companies that are moving human capital around, that are moving people from place to place. So what are some of the reasons why they're still doing that?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that. You know, it's interesting because I had lunch with one of my clients today who was like, well, what do you mean people aren't going on assignment? We're rearing to go. You know, the borders opened up for the US anyway back in November, and we have all kinds of pent up demand to send people. And you know, of course, that makes me happy because that means I have more work to do. Um, and really, this company, they have kind of a dual. They're officially a Geneva headquartered company, but they do have a presence, a pretty strong presence in Fort Worth. They've enabled technology. They have amazing technology, and they had this before COVID where they could have meeting rooms and WebEx meetings and integrated video features in all of their conference rooms so that they could connect with all of their global offices. Whereas other industries and other companies didn't really get on board with the Zoom or Teams or, you know, connectivity for a little bit longer, or as a result of COVID. But there really is a value that companies see by sitting in the same time zone, in the same room, face to face. And this company has really embraced it. So yes, they do have an R&D department, and they do have global manufacturing, which you can't do in a virtual environment. But all of the other support personnel, and even especially the CEO, very early on, I think they've been back in person in their offices since June of last year, which is pretty early. Like, we're back, everybody come to the office. And they just believe that being in person and that human connectivity can't be replaced. So it's true where some companies that may have thinner margins, or their business model may not support a lot of international assignments, and they may be trying to find creative ways to connect people through virtual interfaces. There are others that just strongly believe that having people in country helps. And again, those reasons I listed that companies might be inclined to support an international assignment is to find talent that's not in the local economy. So they're hiring for a job in Austria, they need an engineer or a PhD or somebody that's in applied sciences, and they need to bring that person from, you know, an adjacent country to fill the role. And they need them hands-on, and they need them either for a development or learning or for business continuity purposes.
Okay, super. That is fascinating and also good news, because I think many or most of our attendees are engaged in at least some level of interest or aspiration to do work in the global economy. And the rest of us will be doing so whether we choose to or not, because the economy is global. But in any case, I think it's great news for all of us that that people are still going abroad.
Yeah.
Did you want to show us this before I move on? Did you want to show us?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to maybe support my last comments with, you know, what some of the things that we've observed in kind of this migration of the future of workforce. Because again, as a mobility consultant, I want to look at trends for employers and where jobs are originating and where there are gaps in jobs. And when I hear immigration on the news, I know they're not talking about the things that are meaningful to me. They're talking about the border in Texas versus this idea of immigration and the idea that businesses need visas to keep business open and jobs running and our global economy running. And so when I look at this slide about what new jobs there are going to be, you see in a lot of these Western countries around the globe is that many of the jobs that are being created exceed where we have talent. So the population growth is pretty flat. So this is really a strong reminder that there's opportunity out there to move and to fill jobs. And so just because you're in a blue country doesn't mean you can't move to another blue country. So don't let that bother you either.
All right, thank you. Well, so we're talking about mobility a good bit, and I also wanted to address some of the things that you said earlier when we talked about risk. So what is the role of moving people around? How is that important to the effort to manage risk? And also I had a question about supply chains. You know, we hear so much about the logistical aspect of supply chain problems like chip shortages and containers that are stuck in ports in various parts of the world. But what are some of the human aspects of supply chain management? Honestly, I very rarely hear anybody talk about that. So
yeah, you know, I mean, we hear about supply chain, and my mother said, "Well, Colin, hey, there's no toilet paper in the stores. Like, why is there no toilet paper?" You know, that was the question that we all asked early on. But you know, right now we're seeing so much of an impact in our global economy around supply chain shortages. And I don't know if any of you have gone out to try to buy a car lately. I'm sure it's hopefully common knowledge that there's a microchip shortage, and car manufacturing facilities are struggling to produce cars at the rates that they wanted to, which is interesting because at the beginning of COVID, they had stopped producing them because there was no demand. People weren't driving, people weren't on the roads, they weren't wrecking their cars or anything. People were selling off inventory. And now all of a sudden, there is an increased demand and a pent-up demand, and people want cars, and they've been delaying purchases of cars until they got back to the office. And now we're struggling there. So when I think of, okay, well, supply chain, there's a limit to how many cars we can produce, but what's the human impact to that? If I'm an employer and I'm trying to keep my talent, I've got people who are very specialized in creating cars and putting cars together and getting cars down the road. But if my supply chain is disrupted, how do I staff that? Do I lay people off? Do I staff them on a shift and then let them not work a shift because there's such an inconsistent supply of parts? Parts are either trapped in one country because they can't produce them fast enough because there was a lag, or because maybe they're still sheltering in place. I know China still probably, I think, has a zero COVID policy, and they've closed some manufacturing facilities down for a few weeks to get COVID off again. But it creates disruptions all around the globe and across all industries. There's another thing too that I wanted to address, even when we start thinking about the airline industry, and there are different reasons that we're kind of having this staggered start, or things don't feel as fluent as they used to, or fluid as they used to with travel. Because I will tell you, right before COVID, people were on planes all the time. It worked. You had a flight. If it got canceled, there was another flight. If you were early, you can get on another flight. And now everything is just awkward and broken. And if, you know, we're hearing about flight cancellations and people can't get rebooked for days. Well, there's a reason for that. When COVID hit, a lot of people either decided to retire. Plenty of pilots just said, you know what, it's time. Retirement's waiting for me. I'm going to embrace life. Other people just had an aha moment about quality of life, and they're rethinking what they want to do and going off and starting new things. And I will talk to HR person after HR person as a result of COVID, and they're like, I've lost my talent pool. We've never had any turnover. And now people are leaving, and I'm wondering, is it me? But it's not. It's every single industry. People are leaving that industry and never coming back because they want to do something different, or maybe because they don't want to face the general public. They have fears about COVID, or maybe they've decided. I do laugh about this one. One of my executives who lived on an airplane said, well, you know, I've been spending all this time with my family and I kind of like them, you know. And so I think they've decided to limit their travel or reprioritize where they want to live and work, and the nature of their job. So.
Okay. And um, he's one of the lucky ones, right? The one who mentioned who kind of likes his family.
He likes his family, yeah.
But that's
Actually, he ended
good.
up getting a big promotion, and they brought his whole family to one country, and now he doesn't have to travel as much. So it was a good story.
So it worked out for
It did well. It worked out really well. Exactly.
Well, we're getting a lot of interesting questions, and I'm trying, I think you're actually answering a lot of them as we go.
Okay.
But I am keeping an eye on that, and I'll ask some of the questions that are coming up in the chat pretty soon. But I wanted to know, this is one of the questions people are having. Can you give us some examples of challenges of sourcing global talent for your clients? There are a lot of questions coming in saying, well, do people still want to travel? And if they do, what are the biggest challenges? One person asked, is it cultural adaptation or is it governmental regulations? And are there certain governments that are making it harder than others? Obviously with COVID, it changed. Until recently, that's been changing almost weekly. But in any case, what is your role as consultant to companies who are navigating this environment, and what kinds of patterns are you seeing?
I mean, look, COVID has thrown a wrench in everything in terms of what people being permitted to go to cross a border or to seek long-term employment, and the administrative challenges of doing that, because governments are not known for being nimble or administratively easy to navigate. But at the end of the day, I think what we're realizing, or what we're seeing now, is that companies or countries have embraced the idea that reopening the economy and getting people back to work is important. It's important for the mental health of their citizens. It's important for the thriving businesses. They don't want to be left behind. So we're seeing assignments, international assignments pick up, and the flow of business pick up. Sourcing talent is different for every company. And I think I'd mentioned a couple of times before that, one reason for sending someone on an assignment is to identify the right level of talent needed for a job. And you're not only always going to find that in the same country. And so I just wanted to share with you guys a couple of really interesting assignment complexities or case studies that I've worked on to help companies find talent and get the right person, and why we were pulled in as consultants on that. And this is what's kept me tied to my job for so long, is because just people are interesting and their backgrounds are so interesting. So one of my energy clients was doing business in Western Africa. So they were headquartered in the US. Most of their leadership team were UK nationals, but they needed to staff someone in a security role, like private personal security, for their employees and oversee the kind of security component in Western Africa. So like who fills a job like that? Somebody with a very specialized skill set. So they found some former special forces guy who had this really interesting background of doing, operations like special ops for a government. And now he basically lives with a backpack and can kind of live all over the world. So US headquartered company doing business in Western Africa, hiring somebody that has a UK background. And how do they pay him? So is he on a US payroll? Is he on an assignment, or is he really just a global nomad? And then where should his pension be? And what currency should they deliver his payroll in? Do they pay him in the currency of the country where he's working, or put it into a UK account, or is it US dollar denominated? And what peer salary do you pay to somebody like that? Do you benchmark them against somebody in that country or against an American, or are they in their own category? So these are really interesting questions to ask, and there's no right answer, but there's definitely a way to figure out how to guide a company down that path to get them to get that person to accept the offer and align their housing and their whole total compensation package. There was another interesting case where the company was looking for a leadership development pipeline. So when you look at the C-suite of a company, it's inevitable that those individuals will retire or move on, and they want to groom that next, generation of talent. And so they had an individual that they thought would be really good for the role. And I'll tell you the complexity of this. He was an Indian national. He was on assignment to Singapore, had localized in Singapore. He has a US green card, which means he has to file US taxes. And they needed to move him to Geneva. And he had pension in all 4 countries, India, Singapore, Switzerland, and the US. And we had to navigate the tax implications of all of his assignments and issues to make sure that the offer they were giving him for this new job in Geneva was going to result in, a great offer. So it was interesting. And then, do they still pay for his housing? Is he going to be local? A lot of different questions to answer for there. So anyway, I thought those were interesting case studies to share with you guys.
That is so fascinating. And of course, if you are someone who's considering a move abroad, you want like somebody like Noel in your corner, right? You want somebody who's thought about all of those things and the implications of that move in so many different areas. So that's a really interesting level of insight to get about the nature of being an expatriate and moving around. So one of the most common questions I'm seeing here, or a common question, is, Noel, has to do with your own sort of history and how you went from being a French major to being a tax accountant, and then being in a tax, working for an accounting firm, and then having this non-pure tax role. So do you want to describe that to us a little bit?
Okay. Yeah, well, I never would have picked accounting, as I said, for the career that I chose, or tax for the career that I chose. But look, you guys are all really set up nicely to do anything you want to do in the world. You've got the Longhorn seal of approval that's going to be on your diploma. And the fact that you're in that college means that you've taken initiative and you're broad thinking, and you already have a global mindset. And that's where I started. And, I'm grateful to the university for opening those doors for me and letting my potential rise. And I'd have to say that really it's taking initiative and being focused on really what's in your heart and what you want to accomplish in your life. And for me, I knew that I wanted to do something global, and I wanted to work abroad, and I wanted somebody else to pay for me to go abroad. Because doing it on your own, if you guys have ever traveled internationally, gets expensive, and you probably aren't staying in the nicest hotels or drinking bottled water So, I knew that early on, working for KPMG, that I could go abroad, and I did that but the first thing that was important is, again, I needed a skill to consult on. So I didn't learn my skill necessarily at the University of Texas. I learned it on the job, but I had all of the tools and skills that I needed: the initiative, the confidence, the collaboration, the being unrelenting and being creative about solving problems. And then once I learned my trade, which is filing tax returns for expats, I said, okay, I'm ready. I want to live abroad. I want to go on assignment. And you have to realize that there's nobody out there that's going to take their little wand and say, I'm here to make your life easy and to guide you and help your life be full and valued. You guys really need to take initiative to do that and feel confident doing that, which I'm sure you all are anyway. But it was just saying, I think the timing's right. I want to go on assignment. And I ended up working in Melbourne, Australia for a couple of years. it wasn't my first time abroad. I'd lived and studied in France and in Germany previously, but this was like an opportunity for the company to send me abroad and learn as much as I could about tax while working in Australia and learning to surf and, you know, other cool stuff. But
super, thank you.
yeah.
Also, there have also been a lot of questions about sort of how people learn to be culturally appropriate. And I want to put in a very quick plug for the global management minor and intercultural management courses, which I happen to teach, but that's exactly what we address there. So if you are interested in getting those intercultural skills, we teach them at McCombs. But some of the questions have to do with, you know, are there people who just can't hack it, or is that a serious problem? And are there countries where you wouldn't recommend a client send someone? Do you get involved in that? I mean, your clients I would assume your clients come to you and say, we're sending somebody from this place to this place, help us out. But are you ever in the position of recommending where somebody goes?
So all throughout my career, there's been this idea of, well, we're going to implement a policy at our company where before anybody goes on assignment, they're going to take a DISC test, or they're going to take a test that tells us if they're going to be suitable for taking an assignment. And I kind of am like, oh, that's great. And then I roll my eyes a little bit, and I have a really hard time hiding that. But it's not always an indicator of whether or not somebody's going to be successful on assignment. And I've seen two things happen. I've seen, one, companies really push for a certain individual to go on an assignment because they're really skilled at their job. And then other companies that overthink whether or not they should send somebody on assignment. So those are kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. And just because they really think that individual has a skill set doesn't mean that they're really going to be a great person on assignment. And that's the human factor. There's no way to suss that out. I could probably read a personality and tell you whether or not they'd be good on assignment or not, but some people are and some people aren't. And asking somebody to consider it is good, but also trusting your employees to make the right decision is what's going to make them successful. And then the rest is just trial and error. Some people are going to be really adept at adapting to cultures. Like, I've always taken a mindset when I travel abroad that I never want anybody to know what country I'm from. And when I travel in Europe, I've had people ask me if I'm Danish or Irish or Spanish or Italian, like any country. I used to have brown hair, but it turned blonde for some reason later in life. But it was important that I never wear a t-shirt that says where I'm from, or the NFL team I support, or anything like that, just because I want to integrate and emulate. But not that it's right or wrong, just because I take a different approach. Certainly traveling abroad is important to help you become a lot more empathetic to other cultures, or to what it means, like what it feels like to be an expat. So for me, it was important to have the credibility to have lived abroad and navigated setting up a house, getting cable, or you guys probably don't even have cable anymore. You just stream videos or something. Getting internet access set up in your home, or figuring out how to ride a train, understanding what's culturally appropriate. And I have story after story. There was one HR person who works with expats, and she said, yeah, I was in China and I was trying to get our team really excited. So every time we closed a deal, I would ring this gong. And then she found out later that was like what they do to mourn a death. And so it was completely like she was doing it as a celebration to ring a bell, and it ended up being, but you're not, the thing is, you have to learn to laugh about it and be flexible and be creative. And you're just, and give yourself permission to not be perfect, and have a lot of humility.
So, and that's fantastic advice. And I hope everyone's taking notes, certainly my students. uh, there are so many fascinating things that you're describing here. One of the things I would assume, Noel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that most of the companies we're talking about are large.
Mhm.
They're multinational companies to begin with, and generally large companies. One of the patterns that I've noticed, and maybe you can comment on this, is that it's not uncommon for someone to go to work at a company, maybe a company that's expanding abroad for the first time or into new markets, a smaller company, and to mention that they've studied abroad somewhere or whatever, and to have management come to them at some point and say, well, how cool, you studied in Barcelona, huh? Great, because we need you to go to China. And
Yeah.
you have some shred of international credentials, and they're so unexpected or so scarce that becomes that you're front and center suddenly. And I think that's not at all an unusual model for small companies. Large ones are going to have expatriate managers and people who've already been abroad and have that kind of experience, but small ones may not. And you might, just because you have whatever experience you have, you may be that person. And so one of the important things one of the things that I think is important for students is to let people know. You don't want to hit them over the head with it, that you want to go abroad, you want to go abroad, you want to go abroad, because if they don't have an opening for you immediately, they may think that that's going to be a disincentive for you and that you won't be happy. But letting people know that you have international skills, experience, and interest can cue you up for those positions when they arise. So Noel, I don't know if what I just said is unfamiliar to you, but if you have any comments on that.
No, absolutely. And again, like that, the whole idea of forcing the assignment. So fortunately I was at a company where it was very common to have openings in our member firms and to help encourage and facilitate international assignments. And so I didn't force it. I waited for the opportunity when I was at the right level and when I knew that there was an opportunity. And I didn't force the country either. I was flexible about where I would go, and Australia ended up being my calling. So having that flexibility is important. And that balance between being flexible, but also pushing and continuing to make sure that the company is going to support you in that. So it doesn't mean that, just making sure that you're ready for when the opportunity arises. And it could be for any reason, whether you speak a language, whether you like traveling, whether you have a background of having studied global business, and being open to a new challenge, and all of that is going to help you. I was in a phase of my career where I was learning when I went abroad. They didn't expect me to know everything. They expected me to be eager, determined, hardworking, and to share knowledge. And that was exactly what happened. And then I just learned a lot from it, and I forged great relationships, and I still have those relationships today, both professionally and personally.
Super. Well, you've answered some aspects of the questions that I'm. There's so many. We have a lot of students here this evening, which is wonderful, and there are so many questions about careers. So maybe you can speak a little bit to the question of how would students go about preparing themselves. And by the way, I don't want to offer Deborah's services here without notifying her. So Deborah, you're on point here, but Deborah Salzberg, who's on this message, is a wonderful resource for anyone who's trying to develop international skills. Some of the questions that you're asking about moving towards a career, an international career, she can help with. So please consider her a resource and reach out to her about that question. But Noel, what would you say, generally speaking, about about a student who's thinking about an international career? What kind of preparation should they have? What kind of knowledge should they seek out?
Again, it's identifying, being flexible, because just because you think I want to go work for Ferrari because I like Italy, I like fast cars, and that's what I want to be associated with, doesn't necessarily mean that Ferrari is going to hire you, but they might. And Ferrari does come to Austin once a year to race, and their driving team is there. And actually, I get to help with their taxes in the US, which is kind of cool and fun and sexy to talk about. But it could be that you volunteer for Ferrari while they're in the US and get yourself known, and then begin to find an opportunity where they might have an opening or a need. I can think of so many companies in so many industries that have needs globally, where you could come in in human resources or in marketing or as a business analyst, with a job just to start with. And then from that starting point, the first job's the hardest, branch out and kind of find your chance to either live abroad, if that's the type of global job you're looking for, or interact in the global side of their business. So another one of my clients is 7-Eleven, which you wouldn't think is necessarily a global brand, but they're actually owned by a Japanese parent company, and they are trying to learn as much as they can, because I think they have more 7-Elevens in Japan than we have in the US. So, but their international division is actually quite small for 7-Eleven in the US. And so being in that specialized group and learning, well, what's important to them? Merchandising is important. I did have to laugh, and I was telling this 7-Eleven story to my client and saying, I was buying gas at my 7-Eleven down the street, and I went in to get a Coke, and I'm looking, and they're selling these big remote control helicopters, and I'm thinking, who would buy one of those? And then as I was saying it, this kid that was in college on a Saturday night that was looking to have a good time is carrying one out of the store to his buddies, and they were going to go have fun with a remote control helicopter that they bought at 7-Eleven as an impulse purchase. Who would have thought? That story makes me laugh. But you never know what the idea or what the skill set that they're looking for is going to be. So align it with what your passion and interest is. My passion is people, and interesting people with interesting backgrounds. And I've managed to build a job and a career in tax by being a relationship person. And an example I mean about that is, when we talk about that intercultural aspect, one of the things I prided myself on is the business culture in Australia was very formal. So they would get on the phone with one of our taxpayers and say, "Oh, Mr. So-and-so," and I'm from Texas. I'm like, "Come on." And I'd say, "Jim, we got to get your tax return filed. This is what we're going to do." And I would talk to him like he's a human being, and not kind of this, like he's my friend or a family member or something. And that worked. And it blew away, like, my colleagues. They were like, "How could you ever talk to them without saying Mr. Vincent?" And I was like, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's fine. We're going to do it." And that was kind of the brand I carried forward. So you guys will find what works for you and the niche and the area of a business. And maybe it's in supply chain, or maybe it's in operations or manufacturing or human resources or digital customer technology. There's so many aspects of navigating a global business.
This is so inspiring, because I think a lot of students would like to do something international and have a sense that maybe there isn't a clear path, but also maybe there isn't a path. And I really think there always is a path. And entering with a skill or a goal or a region or some kind of focus is very helpful, because it gives you something to build on, and then go from there. And so if you're if your goal is to travel, well, that's where you start. And once you do have your foot in the door, I think Noel is right that for someone who has global interests, the first job is the hardest. If you position yourself so that you can move from a small company that's branching out, or a company doing one that's global to start with, that where you start a non-global job but can move into a global job, you have lots of opportunities. So Noel, another question, a lot of people are asking in various different ways is, under what circumstances is an in-person presence favored over Zoom? So do you have any, my initial sense is that's kind of hard to answer, because there's probably a lot of answers, but a lot of people are asking this. So do you see patterns? Is there something you can tell us about that?
You mean in the global marketplace? Is that?
Yeah, why are people being sent abroad? Are there particular sectors where this is happening more frequently? Maybe certain levels of a company, certain functions, what?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest things to keep in mind is time zone. So even though you can do your job from anywhere, I had a lot of executives that were back, once COVID hit and we started to lock down, they flew back home. They flew back to their home country because they didn't want to be stuck abroad. And then they got stuck abroad, like back home, but their job was still in a different country, a different time zone. And so even though, let's say, working from London, they could work from London. The US wakes up, it's about noon in London. They start their job at noon, and then they finish at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. Well, it's not that it's not doable, but that's a beating. I mean, you want to sit with your family and enjoy dinner. You want to like watch a football game or soccer game, as they call it. And it's doable for a time, but I think it went on for about 8 or 9 months for some of my expats. And it was more disruptive than they thought, that it breaks up the normal flow of a daily life, like connecting with a family and all of that. So that's a really important factor that we might dismiss early on.
Yeah. I think the time zone issue is actually huge. And if you're serving, I talk to colleagues all the time, if you're serving both Asia and Europe, then, you're working very, very early in the morning, very, very late at night, and having any kind of a life in between is really tough. It's kind of exhausting.
If you don't mind, let me say this too. So what I hear and what I see, as students, you guys are really responsible for your own grades and for yourselves, and to get through school and to get your, through your classes and get your diploma. A lot of employees will start in the workforce and they'll say, but I can work virtually. I'm really effective working virtually and I get my job done. And they're right. But their job is not just to do the work that's in front of them, unless you're like that's all your job is. You're sitting in front of a factory conveyor belt and doing that job. Your job is about being part of a team and a part of a larger team. And connecting in person allows you to do that personal interaction, the being present and being in person and being adaptable to one person, to many people, is about getting our job done, the collective of the team, as opposed to your individual job done. So you may just need to broaden the way you're thinking about what work is. It's not about you, it's about the team staying connected, developing and connecting together. And that's hard to do virtually.
Thank you. I love that point. And since we're at the end of our time, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, but there's another question that's come up several times, which is, do you get to travel? And where do you go and where do you like? And are there any countries that are especially difficult in terms of regulations? And what can you say to that before we have to?
Sure. Well, I'll say this, and maybe it's not the fun or exciting answer that where I say, oh, I travel so much and I have all these stamps in my passport. I do have quite a few stamps in my passport. And early in my career, I did travel, and I got to travel to Venezuela and to Colombia for some work. And I've been to Europe and to Switzerland and France. And France was especially bittersweet for me. It was wonderful because I remember standing in Paris when I was in university, and I was, staying in youth hostels, and I had just a few dollars in my pocket, and I was like, I'm going to be back in this city one day, and somebody's going to send me here for a business purpose. And I got back, and I was doing a proposal in French to win some work with a French client, and it took me 20 years, but I got there. It was a really proud moment. So some of my job I have traveled, and some of my job I haven't traveled. And what the best part of that is I've kind of self-directed that, because my career has been full and robust because I've also been afforded time to be a mother, where there were at least 10 years of my career that I did work part-time and I didn't travel because I didn't want to. I wanted to be home for the kids every day after school. And so I kind of feel like I've got the full enchilada. I got to go live abroad. I got to be a mom. And then now I'm back being a super professional, cool tax partner at KPMG.
All right, so you heard it here. You can have it all. So I know you may, so last question, Noel, because this is something that students were asking, what is KPMG looking for? If you're not looking, and we won't say anything negative about accounting majors. We love accounting majors.
I know.
You came to us looking for non-accounting majors.
Yeah.
That, and what are you looking for?
I know, and it was great because Deirdre, you and I acknowledged that the thing that I love about accountants, that they do think inside the box, and they do think, linearly, and international business majors challenge everything, and they think outside the box, and they don't accept the status quo. And that's what I love about all of you. In your mindset, and especially Longhorns. I mean, we totally, we can't even stand up at a football game and chant together. I love that. We just, walk to the beat of our own drums, and we're so unique and individualized. So I lost track of the question.
What are you looking for?
What am I looking for?
KPMG.
So one of the things that I am doing with Deirdre is finding talent that wants to think globally and that can fit into not just a global mobility profession, which is what I do, but also we have a whole advisory group that interacts with these global companies, and we hire people from all over the world to solve complex business problems around supply chain, around customer experience, around internal audit type issues, and helping their business thrive, and not just worrying about the audit or the tax return, which is the other two areas of business. So what I want to be able to do is introduce someone to Deirdre and to the Center for Global Business that is excited about international business candidates to have this broad, robust background in business, thinking globally, and that is malleable and trainable because you guys are resilient, smart, hardworking, and eager to learn.
Super. Well, I can't think of a better note to end by, but what that means is that you should stay tuned, because we are going to be hopefully announcing various aspects of our partnership, and making opportunities available to you. Noel, it wouldn't surprise me if you hear from some students after this. So is there any way that you would specifically like people to contact you, or like them not to, so that you're not deluged with requests for this and that? What makes sense and what doesn't?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on LinkedIn and send me a message. I usually will not tend to connect with student candidates until I actually know the person. So that I don't, it's not just recruits, but send me a message there and we can connect. I think my email address, if you want to send me an email too, that is fine. And if you're interested in a career or looking at careers, we do have KPMG recruiters on campus that actively work at the University of Texas in McCombs. So there are two different venues. And then go to our kpmg.com website as well, looking for careers. And the reason I felt it was important to reach out to Deirdre too is accounting majors know to come to KPMG because that's where their job is going to be. But international business majors don't necessarily think of KPMG as the place that they would find a job because they think that they have to be an accountant or tax or do something of that nature. And that's just simply not true. So look at the big four, look at KPMG, and we can go from there. But yeah, happy to answer more questions that you have about what I do or the global landscape and all of that. And then hopefully I'll get a chance to meet some of you kind of as we move into the future. I'm hoping to be in Austin and maybe speak in some classes as well.
Yes, I'm looking forward to that. And I encourage all of you so that we don't end up being an inconvenience for Noel, who has been very, very gracious with her offers. Check in with Deborah before you send that email, because it might be that there are a lot of people asking the same question and we can answer it right away or whatever, or funnel through to her so that she doesn't have to feel that she's fending us off. Okay. All right. So thank you, Noel. This has been, I've learned a lot. I know our students have, and even better sometimes than learning, I think, is being inspired and motivated. And this was so inspirational and so very motivating. So thank you very much for your time. And thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, great turnout.
Great audience, and for such great questions. All right.
Absolutely.
We'll see you next time. Thanks very much.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks a lot. Take care.
Bye-bye.